Welcome to a new episode of InFocus with Ejaz Haider. This program is supported by the Center for Security, Strategy and Policy Research. CESPR is an autonomous policy research center housed in the University of Lahore, and it tackles issues that impact contemporary security and strategic developments. In the opening scene of Shakespeare's play Macbeth, before they exit, the three witches chant, "Fair is foul and foul is fair, hover through the fog and filthy air." That sets the scene for a play that mostly unfolds in darkness. There's husbandry in heaven, their candles are all out. So tells Banco to the viewers. I don't know if Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky has read Shakespeare, but if he has, he must be thinking about foul becoming fair as US President Donald Trump greeted Russia's strongman Vladimir Putin in Alaska. The Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi, one of the four foreign leaders to be feted at the White House after Trump's inauguration, must be wondering the same. Nearly a quarter century of Indo-US relations put together, I would say stitched together very carefully by successive Indian and US leaders and top Sherpas on both sides, appear to have hit a tariff wall. The reason? India buying Russian oil, even as Putin gets the red carpet. Now, humans like to structure the world around them. Structure gives meaning and perspective. But how do you structure a world when dealing with Trump? Maybe call Trump daddy like the former Dutch Prime Minister and current NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte does, and ensure that you follow every Trumpian line. Back in June 22, Japan, Australia, New Zealand, and South Korea joined NATO's 2022 Madrid summit to signal to the US and their European partners that there was a nexus between transatlantic and Asian security concerns. A few months after Russia's invasion of Ukraine, then Japanese Prime Minister Fumio Kishida, during a visit to London, had warned that Ukraine may be East Asia tomorrow. While the current Japanese Prime Minister Shigeru Ishiba has welcomed Trump's Alaska summit, Japan is nervous. Issues related to sovereignty and territorial integrity are extremely important and must be discussed in a manner that includes Ukraine, Ishiba said. This was last Sunday. Trump has a different view. He told an interviewer after the summit, look, Russia is a very big power and they, meaning Ukraine, are not. While our focus in this episode would be Indo-US relations, there's a nexus here with other developments, including what I call China's Tai Chi approach to diplomacy. And I have just the right scholar for this discussion, who's also a friend of the program, Dr. Daniel Markey. Dr. Markey is a senior fellow with the China and South Asia program at the Henry L. Stimson Center. He has 2 decades of academic, think tank, and government experience focused on international relations and US policy in Asia, and is the author of China's Western Horizon, Beijing and the New Geopolitics of Eurasia, and also, specifically with reference to Pakistan, No Exit from Pakistan, America's tortured relationship with Islamabad. Dan, thank you so much once again for being on the program. Structure. How do you structure your world when dealing with President Trump? Now, I want to begin here and kind of, it's going to be a back and forth.
Sure.
I don't want to structure it because, because, as I said, structures are very difficult when dealing with Mr. Trump. So a quarter century, as a matter of fact, if we go back even before that, when the Chinese attacked India, as it was called, JFK's forgotten war, the United States was prepared to help India. So they go back even further back, despite India's non-alignment and the rest of it. But Mr. Nehru shooting off these letters to JFK saying, oh, the Chinese are here, they're going to run over India, and, so forth and so on. So, but as I said, very painstakingly stitched together.
Yeah.
Suddenly it runs into this massive wall. Is it about Russian oil? I mean, China is buying more Russian oil. There are European countries that also buy through third parties, including through India,
Right.
The Russian oil. It seems to me that there is something more personal here, and the Russian oil thing might just be a ruse.
Yeah, I agree. Look, first of all, it's great to be back. Happy to be able to speak with you. You're right on everything you've said so far. Our president doesn't appear to think about the world in structured terms that many of us have come to use to help us simplify the vast complexity of international politics, international economics. We use words to describe him now like transactional or tactical, or personal or personalized or personalistic in terms of his style, all of which are about right, but they still seem unsatisfactory because they don't actually give us a great clue as to what might happen next. That is the problem, right? You're right. What's up used to be down. What used to be down is now up, and it seems in U.S. relations across the world, really. And none of us knows what the next day will bring. And if I thought there was a kind of an underlying theme or rhyme or reason to it, I'd probably be very wealthy because I could use that to invest on the stock market. I think all of us are still in a bit of a quandary. And your points about India in particular are spot on. All of us came in watching this new Trump administration 2.0, looking for clues as to who he would bring in terms of personnel, the types of meetings that he would host early in his administration. And basically across the board, what I tended to see was a very pro-India slant. You had, a very prominent participation by Foreign Minister Jaishankar. Even at the inauguration, he had a almost front row center seat, unlike pretty much anyone else. You had this early visit by the prime minister to Washington. You had J.D. Vance's early visit to India. You had prominent people in the administration, like then National Security Advisor Mike Waltz, or Tulsi Gabbard, or Marco Rubio, all of whom had said very positive things about the relationship with India. And the body language, even just that, if you're talking about personal, between Trump and Modi, seemed to be quite good. And then you ran into this brick wall of trade negotiations. But even there, you could say, well, India got out ahead. They started their negotiations earlier than most countries. They were energetic. There were positive sounds coming out about them. Everything seemed to be sort of at least marginally or significantly on track, enough so that you wouldn't be too worried about it getting derailed. And then, boom, we now hit this wall of 50% tariffs, 25% punitive, 25% based on, underlying still negotiable differences over trade. But if you put it together, your bottom line last point has to be right, which is there's something more going on here. There's something that's a little bit behind the scenes, and the something that most of us have cottoned onto as the thing seems to be very personal, which seems to have been a very bad phone call between the prime minister and President Trump. It's been reported in the media. I don't have any firsthand accounts, so I can't verify it, but it seems to fit, which is somehow because Prime Minister Modi was upset with Trump over his comments regarding especially the India-Pakistan conflict and Trump's claims of bringing about a ceasefire. Prime Minister Modi seems to have wanted to set the record straight in that conversation and to make sure that Trump understood that he was dealing with an important power in India and India wasn't going to take it anymore. Well, apparently, Prime Minister Modi's attempt at this did not succeed and actually soured the relationship. And we'll see if it actually poisoned the relationship such that it will stay. But the last point I make before we get back into the back and forth is just nothing is permanent with President Trump. So what's down is up, what's up is down, but tomorrow the reverse. And Zelensky was humiliated in the Oval Office, and now he's been brought back wearing a nice suit. Maybe things are back on. Putin gets bashed, then Putin sees love and affection, then bashed again. Which is it? Our European allies have no idea which side they're really on. So India is a part of the broader mix here, and could, tomorrow it could be my good friend Prime Minister Modi again, and we could be back to the races. But let's get into it. But it looks maybe worse than that.
Yeah, so I'm happy you've talked about the personal sort of angle to this, because that is also my reading of it. Russian oil, especially when you red carpeting Putin, is not really that much of a problem. And as a matter of fact, unlike China, which has been buying Russian oil through intermediaries and largely covertly, India has been pretty upfront about the entire thing. The Biden administration knew, the entire world knew that they're buying the oil, they're refining it, and they're re-exporting it to a number of European countries. So nothing was really hidden. But this personal element, for someone who, and I have been watching his joint press conferences very closely. Every time he is standing next to a foreign leader, and when the foreign leader speaks and mentions him personally, Trump immediately turns his neck, looks at him, smiles. He loves the fact when someone is talking about him in words that are obviously laudatory. Now, by the same measure, if someone tries to, as you put it, set the record straight, and frankly, we don't know if Mr. Modi set the record straight, or whether, the Indians have been saying that the ceasefire came into being because the Pakistanis asked for it. Pakistan says, of course, that's not the case.
Right.
And Marco Rubio and Trump say that, we thought this was escalating and therefore we got into the fray, even though we had earlier had a sort of hands-off approach. So we really don't know if Mr. Modi set the record straight, but we do know that having told the domestic constituencies in India that India was winning and that Operation Sindoor had basically achieved all its objectives, it was certainly very difficult for Mr. Modi to have accepted the fact that the ceasefire came into being through the brokering of the United States.
Yeah.
So I think that is where Mr. Modi took the wrong, he put the wrong foot forward, if you will. And then, of course, in addition to that call, spurning Mr. Trump's invitation to Washington, because again, Mr. Modi, from his point of view, was perfectly justified in avoiding a situation where he might have been closeted with Field Marshal Asim Munir.
Yes.
Which would have been a complete and utter disaster for Mr. Modi.
Politically, yes.
Yeah. So I think there's been a confluence of these strange sort of happenings, which have. But moving on the basis of how Trump operates, for instance, as you said yourself, Zelensky this time, of course, he wasn't wearing a tie, but neither was he in fatigues.
Mm-hmm.
So he knew that, he's going to the Oval Office. So this time, let's not have someone actually ask him whether he owns a suit or not. Similarly, you saw the heads of government and state of the European leaders, all of them making sure that none of them says anything that moves away from the Trumpian line. They realize that they're dealing with someone who does not like to be, told that he's wrong.
That's right.
So even when they say things, they say it sort of, in a way that is kind of between the lines. Given that, and given Wang Yi's visit to India, and President Xi Jinping's personal invitation to Mr. Modi to attend the SCO summit, for which he'll be leaving for China on at the end of this month, You think that India's now trying to do some kind of strategic reset with China, or is it just a tactical reset?
Right. Look, a lot of important points that you've just made, and I could go back to each one of them, but let me focus on this last bit, the India China side of it. I do think that India and China are each, for related reasons, attempting a reset. And I do think that there is a very direct connection to Trump and the way that he's introduced anxieties and uncertainties into the international order, and certainly very much in India's mind about where it stands with the United States. I do think it's important, though, to step back a little bit and say, well, India and China were looking for a means to find at least a partial reset in their relationship, even before Trump was guaranteed of a victory, and certainly before he actually came into office. This was in the works. This has been in the works for a couple of years now, at least. They've had innumerable conversations, but we really did see in the summer and spring, even before the U.S. election, we already started to see some movement. India and Pakistan, India and China. China sent its ambassador to India finally after several years of not having an ambassador there. So there were signs of some sort of a breakthrough, and I attribute all of that to a mutual understanding in Beijing and in New Delhi. As they've always said, they have a number of national interests, if not in common, at least in harmony. It doesn't help them to not have a robust trade relationship. It doesn't help Indian manufacturers to not have cheap Chinese inputs or access to cheap Chinese technology. It doesn't help the Chinese not to be able to invest in Indian markets. So there were very material kind of interest reasons for both of them to find a way to get beyond where they had been stuck for several years. And that stalemate along the border and in the bilateral relationship had demonstrated, India was serious. It wasn't going to back down. And China was serious. It wasn't going to back down. They had both demonstrated that. There was sort of diminishing returns to continued demonstration of that reality. And now they could try to find ways to pursue other interests simultaneously. It did mean India was backing off a bit of its stated line that nothing would be resolved until the border was resolved. So India needed to find enough satisfaction along the border to get that game back going. So anyway, so that's the context. Now you throw Trump into the mix. And I think in my read of it, you initially did see a bit of a Chinese move, an anticipation early on that Trump actually might come back. And in preparation for that, I believe, and I have heard other analysts and Chinese experts suggest that their anticipation, say last summer into the fall, of a likely Trump victory led them to want to take the India piece off the chessboard, so to speak. In other words, to not have a lingering and very serious dispute with India that might catch the Trump administration's attention right at the get-go and cause additional frictions, because they anticipated that their relationship with Washington would be troubled and problematic and would need a lot of attention, whether with respect to Taiwan or Tibet or just more generally on trade issues. They really wanted to be able to devote their whole attention to the bilateral relationship with the United States, not have something else like India get in the way or worsen that. So I think the Chinese had an impulse to kind of find some kind of a reset there. The Indians, I think, came a little bit later to the party as they have started to realize that in addition to all of the things I said before, that they had very practical reasons to want to find some more workable relationship with China, now they have this deeper anxiety, I think a very serious anxiety, that they could be basically left to hang out to dry without America's help in a broader sense against China, that this Trump administration does not appear to fully appreciate, at least in the president's mind himself, doesn't seem to fully appreciate India's potential utility as a counterbalance to China over the long term. This kind of big strategic bet that now multiple American presidents and administrations have made, the idea that India could actually be long term useful to the United States. it's not clear that Trump buys into that. And if he does, it doesn't seem to be affecting his policies in the near term. And that makes India very nervous because as they look out into the world, they know that without the United States, they don't have a powerful patron and champion that can help them sort of externally balance against China in the near term. Now, India's ambitions are much greater than that over the long term. I mean, India wants to be a superpower in its own right, doesn't want to be a junior partner to the United States, and so on and so forth. But in the near term, they know they need all the help they can get. And they know that a distanced Washington, an alienated Washington, creates real problems for them. So now they're trying to make nice with the Chinese, I think, in the short term, recognizing that. And then finally, I think they want to also demonstrate to Washington that they have options, that they can't be pushed around. And so they're trying to sort of recalibrate all of these balances. The very last point I'll make here is they too, though, are really struggling to make sense of what President Trump is actually going to do. I mean, we all are, but the big gap in our understanding right now is President Trump a China hawk? No one knows. And until we have a better read on that, we know he has some hawks in his administration. We know he has some restrainers. We have, a variety of different characters. But ultimately, would he be satisfied if he can make a good trade deal with the Chinese, one that he thinks is fair, and then leave the strategic competition to future administrations and really kind of lighten up on that? If so, India has other things to be concerned about. This would be a real about face for Washington. So that's how I see these things kind of unfolding right now and over the past couple of years.
Very important observations, Dan. I have a couple of observations for your, interpretation or whatever. So one, personally, I have never considered India to have seriously considered itself as US's countervailing force to China.
Yeah.
India and China are contiguous. India knows, rhetoric aside, that China is a much bigger power. It's a great power. And secondly, India knows that it does not have, or at least at this stage and for a very long time to come, it will certainly not have the kind of military capabilities required to be a serious countervailing force to China. Having said that, they did find, because as I said earlier, and both of us agree on this, that over a quarter century of carefully crafted strategic partnership between India and the United States, India definitely wanted to piggyback the United States and its concerns for a number of reasons, for opening up the Indian market to the United States, benefiting from that, of course, benefiting from the US technology in space, artificial intelligence, etc., etc. So it was prepared to play along. But it always knew that it has to have some kind of balance with China. It doesn't want to become a junior partner of China, but it also does not necessarily want to antagonize China. And we saw this after the June 2020 clashes, which were the most serious ones since the 62 war. Modi played it down to the extent that he was actually blasted by the opposition and lots of analysts in India. Also, while during Operation Sindoor, Indian analysts were really blasting China for backing Pakistan, and also Turkey and Azerbaijan. It is very interesting that they have, while they have, officially somewhat downgraded relations with Azerbaijan and Turkey, they have actually gone and reached out to China, because I believe there is the force asymmetry also.
Yeah. If I could, I mean, you're making a perfect point, and I do want to jump in on it. I mean, I 100% agree with you that any shrewd Indian analyst will immediately appreciate the point that you've made, which is that they do not have great military options with respect to China, and it doesn't matter ultimately, if they are working with the United States, they have a big strategic problem on their hands if China is actually an adversary, a hostile adversary on their border. The one that is a problem that India cannot solve. And you're absolutely right that that balance, even at times of friction, has been one that Prime Minister Modi has been, in my view, smart to maintain despite the opposition politics that he has to weather because of it. The alternative would be to pick a fight that he can't win. And that looks, very much like Nehru. And we know that that didn't end well. So I do think that that is a piece of what's going on. But at the same time, you're also right that India has realized that presenting itself to Americans and to US leaders as a part of a counterbalancing strategy to China is also very smart. And can also mean that they can extract benefits from the United States and do well to use that sort of sense of shared threat, even though the threat is different and the strategies for dealing with that threat will be different, but use that to get something out of the United States. I think that shrewd Americans, and there are some, but maybe not as many as we need. But anyway, there are some who recognize that India wasn't going to be a military counterweight to China, not anytime in the near term, and maybe never, but that there were still benefits to India, just like, Japan alone can't be a counterbalance to China. So India would be a part of a mix. But beyond that, and here's where I think it starts to get more interesting, I think some Americans, maybe rightly, maybe wrongly, this is a little bit outside of my field, but have also begun to see the world less in the military geopolitical sense or even the kind of traditional economic sense, and more in terms of technology and this critical and emerging technologies competition, where China is moving ahead very rapidly, and where in their minds, that's where China actually poses the greatest threat to the United States. Now, India here too is not in itself a solution to that problem. But what India brings is massive data, simply because it's got massive population, and data in this view of the world becomes in itself a valuable resource, kind of like oil. The
Absolutely.
Chinese analysts have said this as well. And India brings the potential to, with that data and with the sort of human capital, which has fed a lot of success in Silicon Valley already, with the partnership with the United States, there too is a potential assistance in a counterbalancing in the technological space and that competition with China that the United States is also very worried that it will lose without access to those things. So India brings other things to the table for these analysts that aren't measured by whether India would, say, start a war in the Himalayas if we're at war over Taiwan. These are very different aspects. I think they were all a part, certainly, I think, of the Biden administration's approach to India, which I think also happened to overplay India from my perspective. But that's what I think what drove a lot of it.
Yeah. Oh, no, I'm happy that you jumped in. But just to add to
Yeah.
what I was going to say, uh, we also get the sense after Trump's initial, bluster about, oh, I'm going to, essentially screw China, we realize that when the Chinese just basically said, okay, if you want to play this tariff game, we have our own areas where we can hurt you. One of them being the export of rare earth minerals,
Yeah.
essentially the refined product, which is today's cocaine, as people call it, for everything that we do, including this computer that I have, where we, talking to each other, to our refrigerators, to our smart TVs, to fighter jets, to spaceships, and they control 90% of it.
Yeah.
So Trump is now, from where I stand, and correct me if I'm wrong, you are a China expert, I feel that Trump has realized that it is much better to have a deal with China, with Xi Jinping, than to have adversarial relations that are likely to hurt America anymore. So he seems to be indicating that to Xi, not just in and through the various, iterations of the trade deal, but also in terms of having some kind of meeting with Xi Jinping. So I think the Indians are also watching that. And the Japanese and the South Koreans and the Australians are also watching that. So I think my sense is that countries will start to recalibrate how they approach not just the United States, but also China.
I think you're exactly right. Again, I think this issue of critical minerals is one, I think, in a category of areas where China, it appears to me, genuinely has the capacity to hurt the United States, to hurt U.S. producers, to hurt U.S. industry. And China would be and has shown itself willing to use that American vulnerability to its advantage in negotiations. And that will persist. And so Trump, to some extent, who is probably hearing from U.S. manufacturers and U.S. technology folks that they need access here, you're right, believes that he needs to get some deal. Now, for what it's worth, I think that if a Biden administration had gotten a second term, I think they also would recognize that they needed some kind of a more stable deal with China. What I think the Biden administration did was they wanted to avoid making what they perceived as the mistake of the earlier Obama administration. They did not want to start soft with China and then have to get tough. They wanted to start tough, firm up their alliances, firm up their negotiating position, and even try to firm up the sort of the stability of the U.S. economy. And from that position of greater strength, then negotiate with the Chinese. It was all, I think, fairly sophisticated, at least in that respect. Didn't work.
Just a clarification, because my sense was that while Biden obviously was an alliance builder, and he wanted to have his allies with him while he was dealing with China, but my sense was that he was basically piling up on what Trump 1.0 had already done against China. And then he piled further on that by having this small yard, high fence strategy and trying to kneecap the Chinese tech, which has basically badly backfired, if you ask me. And there's a lot of literature now coming up on that. So yeah, just carry on.
Maybe so. I think in my view, the Biden administration rightly appreciated that they would be in a better negotiating position with respect to the Chinese if they had their allies on board, if they also could bring on partners, big partners like India, because negotiating with the Chinese alone created opportunities for Beijing to drive wedges, say to try to peel the Europeans off, and so on. And that's not something the Biden administration wanted to do. Now, I do not know if, we'll never know if the Biden administration had had another 4 years or a Harris administration had come in, whether they would have been able to then turn that into useful leverage and negotiate a more workable arrangement with the Chinese. But I anticipate that that's what they would ultimately, at some level, have wanted to do. I don't think they had a vision that they could actually effectively throttle China to death, and really, in China's view, contain Beijing permanently. I think they thought they could reset the terms of the competition in ways that would give the United States an advantage, and in doing so, also then come back around to renegotiate the economic relationship with China. I think that's where they would have liked to go. And more to the point, since that's old history now, the problem with the Trump administration is that it seems like he's kind of going in the reverse direction, right? So he sees vulnerabilities on the U.S. side. He wants to cut a deal with the Chinese. He doesn't seem to be inclined to do that from a position which includes European or other partners. He's already hammering everybody else in the world over trade, giving China openings in terms of trading relationships and making China look like the good guy in many parts of the country, parts of the world, as a potential alternative to the United States. So anyway, in many ways, he's sort of fracturing the coalition that Biden painstakingly built. And in doing so, I think will reduce America's leverage with respect to the Chinese, and put us in a position where we have to cut kind of deals that, I would imagine the Chinese would be very happy with, which would be sort of short-term arrangements that preserve U.S. Access to things like critical minerals, or maybe get open opportunities for U.S. to send certain technologies, semiconductor chips and so on, to China to make money for U.S. companies. But over the long run, put China in a better position to compete strategically against the United States. Now, if I'm Beijing at this moment, that looks like a really good deal, one I'd be happy to take. And it relieves a lot of the pressure that I think was building on China under the Biden administration. I mean, if you flip this around, it's not like America was in, perfect economic shape under Biden, but things were starting to look a bit better in my read. And I think China was starting to feel some heat. And now I think, it looks like we may be in the opposite situation. And that's not a good spot to be in from a negotiating perspective.
Yeah, well, Trump thinks that he knows the art of the deal. Two quick questions,
Yeah.
Dan, and then I just want to have one question with a broader sweep before we close this.
Yeah.
So, two quick questions. Whatever the nature of this reset between China and India, with the SCO summit coming up and Xi Jinping meeting with Mr. Modi, and Wang Yi's, conversations with Jaishankar and Doval and Mr. Modi, you think that could have an impact on India-Pakistan relations? That's one question.
Mm-hmm.
And secondly, and I ask this question because China, as you know, is also bringing together Afghanistan and Pakistan. China is now, their Tai Chi diplomacy, as I call it. They want to be in a position to replicate what they did, for instance, between Saudi Arabia and Iran. And they want to have, whatever their interests may be, because I think they're linked not just with showing diplomatic heft, but also the BRI aspect of it and, connectivity and the rest of it. So that's one question. And second question, remember you and I were discussing this bilaterally about where the needle is likely to go with Field Marshal Asim Munir's visit to the United States. Seems like it went a couple of notches up.
More than a couple, yeah.
In ways that neither of us could have predicted or neither of us actually expected. While ironically, the needle on Indo-US relations has actually come a few notches down. So quick responses to that, and then we close it with a broader sweep.
Absolutely, yeah. So quickly, look, I think that for China, Pakistan remains kind of a core partner. I think that China actually, coming out of the India-Pakistan conflict in May, I think that China was frankly pleased with Pakistan's performance. I think that China, in a way, separates out its relationship with India and Pakistan. I think that China will continue to see India as a kind of a big but irritating, disruptive player. And so its outreach to India right now is real, but it is taking place in a way independent of what I perceive to be China's continuing desire to work with Pakistan, frankly, to arm Pakistan, to help Pakistan defend itself against India. I think China can do both at the same time. Its relationship in the sort of Pakistan-Afghanistan space is a little bit different. I think China would simply like Afghanistan to be less of a problem in the region. And to the extent that it can help to smooth over problems between Pakistan and Afghanistan, I think it's trying. It's not trying super hard. It's not fixing Afghanistan. But it, as you say, it would like to play a kind of a useful bridging role, like it did, in a sense, between Saudi and Iran. So that's a quick answer to that. On the astounding success, I would say, diplomatic success of your Field Marshal, Army Chief Asim Munir, on Pakistan's success more generally with Washington. Look, count me shocked and surprised in so many ways. going back to the outset of your program, what's up is down. I never would have guessed this. I think that at a basic level,
that makes two of us, frankly.
well,
I
there
mean,
you go. Yeah.
it's one of those things where, you're trying to look for a structure,
Yeah.
but you don't really find it.
No. The rational component of it has something to do certainly with very forthrightly and quickly addressing certain stated requirements out of Washington on counterterrorism in particular. And then also figuring out ways to say things like to talk about Nobel Peace Prizes and ceasefires in ways that are music to our president's ears.
Yeah.
The longer answer is I do wonder whether there's more in the works. I do wonder what people may be thinking about in terms of Pakistan's broader utility. I know that there's some shuttle diplomacy. General Munir seems to be, Field Marshal Munir seems to be playing some role in conversations between Washington and Tehran. I don't know how important that is to broader calculations. And beyond that, I wonder how he has suggested that Pakistan might be useful to the United States in ways that Trump seems to care about. And here, my current pet theory is maybe there are conversations afoot about a kind of a Pakistani force with respect to Gaza even. And I have no proof to this, but I just wonder, what other things would Pakistan be prepared to do that, again, would be music to President Trump's ears? If there's nothing, which is quite possible since I have no proof to any of this, if there's nothing, then I would have to, if I were sitting in Islamabad, I have to wonder just how temporary this turn of events is as well, because some of this, can turn on Trump's mood, which side of the bed he'll wake up the next day. And I think Pakistan would be right to have some concerns there.
Yeah. I actually, think that you might not be wide off the mark on some of the hypotheses that you have presented. Certainly not on Tehran and Washington, because my own nuts and bolts information from here is that during that lunch, this was discussed. Pakistan, as you know, has a certain position on Israel, on Gaza. Those positions are very clearly articulated, and they're not new. They've been there right from the partition plan, which we opposed then, which we've never recognized Israel. So that position is very clear. But at the same time, within the unfolding, sort of evolving situation, there are a number of things that Pakistan might think it can do. So I agree with you that obviously President Trump is someone who would be very interested if someone were to tell him that, we think that you're trying to do something right, and perhaps we can contribute to what you're trying to do. So, that will certainly be music to his ears.
Yeah.
One final sort of broader sweep. It seems to me that Quad is in animated suspension. AUKUS might just be without any submarines because the U.S. Navy itself is short of the submarines, that 3 of which were to be given to Australia. Then this Russo-Ukraine thing. From where I stand, it seems to me that President Trump has already indicated to President Zelensky also and to the European leaders of the broader contours of what the deal would be like. And territorial concessions is going to be part of that. I have no idea what a NATO-like security guarantee is likely to be, because I don't think that Putin is going to accept any European troops in Ukraine. He seems already to be leaning towards the idea of the Chinese giving some kind of security guarantees to the Ukrainians. So just give me a sort of, I know I put a lot on the table,
Yeah. Yeah.
and I'm asking a lot of you to try and,
Sure.
put it together quickly. But
Yeah. How do these pieces fit together?
yeah,
Yeah. So going back to the beginning, you mentioned Quad, you mentioned AUKUS. Look, those two, big surprise there. One of the first meetings that happened in Washington after Trump's election or Trump's inauguration was a Quad meeting.
yeah,
And the idea that now Quad summit that's supposed to be in India may not happen, that Trump might not go. This seems so strange. The first Trump administration actually turbocharged Quad
yeah,
intentionally and tried to
absolutely.
make it more of a thing, make it more militarized. And to walk away from that would be very odd and not terribly shrewd strategically. Similarly with AUKUS, although that wasn't a Trump administration idea, and you could imagine him walking away from it simply because it wasn't his idea. There too, though, a lot of work was done, a lot of promises have been made, a lot of political capital has been spent in Australia to
Oh,
defend
yeah.
this deal, and then to walk away from it just seems like a big waste. And there are other ways to have managed it. So both of those look like you might say own goals or self-inflicted wounds, unnecessary by a Trump administration and hard to defend. On the situation in Ukraine, though, look, your guess is as good as mine. I really don't, have any deep and certainly not any firsthand understanding of, say, the president's mind on how he thinks all of this will play out. But I will suggest that, ultimately, President Trump has said a whole lot of things about how he's going to make peace in Ukraine and how quickly and how easily and how everything is going to come together and how he's going to meet with Putin and there'll be a ceasefire and this and that and the other. And if you added up all the things that he has said, you'd first of all, you'd see there are quite a lot. And secondly, you'd be even more confused than we already are. And ultimately, I think we have to recognize that this isn't a deal that Trump can simply conjure up out of his own imagination and foist onto the world. Uh, Putin has already taken incredible risks and paid enormous costs for this war. The idea that he would just satisfy Trump simply because Trump is telling him he needs to do something because now it's Trump, he's on the watch, and it's now he's the president and everybody has to listen. That's ridiculous. And similarly, Ukraine has taken a lot of damage and has suffered a tremendous amount. And the Ukrainian people, though I'm sure they're exhausted, I have to wonder whether they would prefer to be exhausted to the point of having to be extinguished rather than to accept a deal that they think is unfair, unconscionable, and would set them back and actually not even secure them. Your points about kind of security, what sort of security guarantees, what would Ukraine actually trust in the way of
Yeah.
a Trumpian security guarantee at this moment? I do not know. So I just see this as actually, I hope I'm wrong, but I see this as just as intractable a conflict as it has been. And the only thing that's changed has been a whole bunch of meetings and talk out of our president, but not something that fundamentally changes the nature of the conflict or the structure of what's driving these two countries to continue their war. So, more power to him. If Trump can actually conjure some success, I'll be pleased. I think the world would be pleased. But I just see these continuing barriers. And the last point here is if I'm in New Delhi and I'm watching all this, I'm also very worried because India has been made an example and has been, in my view, maybe even unfairly, but definitely targeted for its oil relationship with Russia in a way that seems completely out of line with the reality of the war and everything else. But the longer the war persists, the longer the chances are that India will continue to be punished. And that's not good from an Indian perspective either. So, this has second order implications for the rest of the world as well.
My own sense is, as I said earlier, that the Russian oil is just a ruse. It's
Yeah.
much more personal. I also believe, looking at how President Trump spoke about the conflict, the war this time, he was very clear in saying that, he thought that it was pretty easy, but he has now realized that it's extremely complicated. And I also believe that he seems to suggest to the Ukrainians also and to the Europeans also that whatever deal is going to happen, it's not going to be an ideal deal, but the not having a deal is likely to get Ukraine to a point where Ukraine might then have to go for a much worse deal. I think that's the point that he's trying to sell to the Ukrainians also and to the Europeans also. And I don't think, he said that whether the Ukrainians take the deal or they don't take the deal is entirely up to them. So I think he's basically kind of putting the picture in front of them. And I think a lot of this picture, possibly much to the chagrin of the Ukrainians, is something that he has gotten from President Putin during their 3-hour meeting in Alaska. But anyway, thank you so much, Dr. Daniel Markey.
Thank you
for your insights. Always a pleasure to talk to you. This is all from this episode. If you like the discussion, you subscribe to our channel, send us comments. It'll always help us. Until our next episode, goodbye and stay safe.